I'm 30 years old, and I share a house with my sister. It's a 2-floor house, a mother-daughter house, meaning it has 2 kitchens. My sister takes the downstairs, I take the upstairs. My sister isn't home a lot because she often stays with her boyfriend who lives 20 miles away. Like I said, I'm 30. I shouldn't let being home alone ever freak me out. But, admittedly, sometimes it does. This happened on a night that I was home alone in my living room watching a scary movie. My part of the house is an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one big space. My couch is in the middle of the space, so as I watch TV on the couch, my back is to a large part of the room behind me. So for those a little more easily spooked, it wouldn't be the most comfortable place to be sitting alone watching a scary movie. I'll admit, as I watched in the dark room with nothing but the light from the TV to cancel the darkness of the room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder a lot. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old male that does that. But anyway, after the movie, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, then went to sleep. My sleep lasted for about 2 hours. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. It sounded like she was inside the house, so it's not like she was calling for me to open the door. But still, I knew it was my sister's voice. I didn't know what she was yelling up to me though, but I was still groggy and not thinking straight. All I could think was that she must have been calling for me, or arguing with her boyfriend. So I got out of bed and went into the pitch black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and then made my way through the living room and heard my sister's voice again from downstairs. Now I could understand her to be saying my name. I made my way downstairs in the dark, yelling back at her, "What is it?" I looked for the light switch in the foyer downstairs, but couldn't find it. I'm not lying when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch, and flick it on. The light in the kitchen lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up, but I still saw that there was no one down there. Not her, not her boyfriend. I went to her bedroom, but it was empty. I called her name really loudly one time. No one called back, but shortly after I yelled, I heard something drop to the floor in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked, and it was empty. I went back up the stairs like a little kid and went back to my bed to where my phone was. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't pick up. I had myself locked in my room, wondering if I had just hallucinated all of that. Eventually I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up to text from my sister asking why I called her at 1 a.m. I asked her if she was home last night, and she told me no, she was currently staying at her boyfriend's house. I went downstairs to her bedroom to see what may have fallen down on the floor, but there was not a single object on the floor that could have made that noise. I'm led to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night, but that's what I want to believe, because the alternative would be much more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything else, or had any kind of sleep disorders, so how vividly I heard my sister's voice, and that sound in her room, really freaks me out. I was left home alone a lot as a kid, just due to the fact that my mom was single for a good chunk of my upbringing, and she worked as an RN on a crappy RN schedule, and my brother went away to college. This was a night that my mom was working an overnight. It was a weekend night, so I had this girl Molly over who I was talking to, and she hung out for a while. We watched a couple movies and whatnot, and eventually she had to go home because her parents don't like her out late, so I was left alone to hold down the fort. I continued to watch TV in my room and bed. My bedroom is upstairs next to the backyard, so when someone dragged one of the chairs on the deck outside, I heard it. I got up and looked out the window, and I saw someone sitting on one of the deck chairs down below. I called Molly's name thinking it was her. After all, she'd only left under 10 minutes ago. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Molly. I immediately pulled away from the window to hide. That was not anybody I recognized. Not in the darkness, at least. I texted a few close friends in our group chat if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who answered all said no, and asked what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house to mess with me like that anyway. Scared shitless, but still curious, I slowly walked back over to the window to look down again, and that person was still sitting in the chair, looking up at my window. It was a he, that much was clear, and he definitely saw me. I hurried away from the window again to turn off the TV. I sat in my bed in a ball basically, with my arms wrapped around my knees. I waited in darkness for a while. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was scared he'd see the light. I didn't even want to move because the window was opened and I feared that he'd hear any movement I made. I wanted him to assume I was just no longer in the bedroom. I waited enough time. It had to be a solid 5 minutes of just sitting there. I highly doubted that man outside could still be there. I finally mustered up the courage to get up and look out the window. I felt a little part of me die inside when I saw he was still down there, looking up at my window. Instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and said down to him, "What do you want?" I then noticed his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard, but he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first, till I heard a slight whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he was wheezing. I asked him to please go away, then walked away from the window again. I went back to my bed. I was scared to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairway listening. The back door was being pushed. He was trying to get into the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was 14, I didn't know what else to do. Eventually I heard the front door's doorknob being fiddled with, and the man trying to push the front door open as well. He gave up quickly, thank God. I closed my bedroom window and curtains. If our doors weren't locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak when I was 14, and definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again that night until my mom got home around 9. I told her what happened, and her reaction was angry at me for not calling 911, and in hindsight that was very stupid of me. One of the many things I did, or rather didn't do at a young age, that I question greatly. This was the story of how I almost died as a young kid home alone, and possibly the most intense night of my life with way too much going on. We're a family of 5. I was 10 at the time. My older brother was 14, my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night. My brother was out with his friends causing trouble clearly, because a dreaded phone call came to my parents. All I remember was I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game when I heard my mom start freaking out crying. I got really scared and hurried to see what was wrong. My mom was on the phone with the hospital, calling to inform my parents that my brother had gotten hit by a car. Obviously, we were all shaken and really scared. My brother's leg was broken, but I don't know what else was said on the phone. All I know is my parents hurried to get their coats on and got my little sister from her room and asked me if I was okay to stay home alone. I said yes, and they hurried out to the car and left. I was of course really worried for my brother, but I really didn't want to go to the hospital and see him in any kind of bad condition. I don't think my parents wanted me or my sister to either, but they didn't want to leave my 5-year-old sister home without them. It's worth mentioning my brother recovered just fine, as his injury is no longer relevant to the story, other than it being the reason why I was left home alone on a Friday night. Before my dad left, he was trying to calm down my mom, telling her he was going to be okay. So seeing my dad like that made me feel better. I had a feeling my mom was just being overdramatic like any mom would be. I continued playing the Star Wars game for a couple more hours when I heard the front door open. I had my bedroom door closed. By this point, it was easily past midnight and past my bedtime, so I turned off the TV and PlayStation and crawled into my bed with my Game Boy. I tried listening to hear my parents' voices, maybe hear if my brother was with them or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes of not hearing them even come up the stairs, I had a feeling something was wrong. I went to my door and quietly opened it, then walked over to the ledge and banister that overlooked the living room. The lights were off, but there were 3 tall people standing in my living room. They weren't my family. I was so petrified that I was frozen for a second before I could quietly walk back into my room and shut the door as quietly as I could in my trepidation. But it wasn't quiet enough, and I knew it. They had to have heard the door click shut even if just slightly. I hurried to my closet door, opened it quietly, stepped inside, then shut the door. I had myself sitting behind a bunch of the boxes and bags of clothes that were stuffed in my closet. I was actually pretty covered from view. There was this short period that felt like forever that I was anticipating my bedroom door open, and it did. And at that moment, I knew I was going to die. I heard footsteps walk into the room. I couldn't tell how many people. It may have been 1, it may have been 2. I heard the footsteps move to my bed, then I heard my covers being played with. Then silence, then more footsteps towards the closet door, then silence for a few seconds. And then the closet door opened. My heart was in my throat by this point. All I did was sit quietly and hold my breath. The door was open for a really long time, but I didn't look up. I didn't move. It had to be a good 20 seconds of silence before the door closed again. Footsteps walked away from the door, then out of the room. I finally looked up, and I just realized, from where I was crouched down behind the bags and boxes, I may have been visible to that person. It wasn't until probably an hour that I heard my parents return. I ran downstairs to them. The front door was left ajar by the people who broke in, and they had stolen a number of valuables from our house. It was a night that just went from bad to worse for our family. My parents were in such a rush when they left for the hospital that they apparently didn't even lock the door. I was lucky to have not been killed or kidnapped. I look back now and really wonder if the person who opened the closet and just stood there for 20 seconds saw me hiding in there. Maybe he was just a guy that came to rob a house, not to kidnap or hurt a child. Or maybe he just didn't see me and I just narrowly escaped death or injury. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents don't go out a lot. My mom's rich friend Patty invited my parents on a trip that she was paying for. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in Newark, Ohio, which is in Licking County. Yes, our county was actually called Licking County. My parents' old house had woods in the backyard and was on some quiet road that only a few cars would pass per day usually. We had a huge deck in the backyard overlooking the woods and a decently large backyard. We even had a little fish pond and above-ground swimming pool. This was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had conversations with friends about plans for the weekend that day. This was in July of 2013. I was out on the deck smoking weed with my speaker playing music. That's about the time it started. I thought I heard a voice from out in the woods. I lowered the music and listened for a little bit. It didn't repeat, so I raised it back up. When the music was loud again, I heard a voice from out in the woods again. This time I turned the music off completely and listened for longer. There was a voice calling from the woods again, confirming I wasn't just hearing things. It was a male's voice, saying, "Hey, over here." He was kind of distant, but not too far. The woods were anywhere from 20 to 30 yards away from the deck, and that's where the voice was coming from. I didn't think in a million years it was someone calling out for me, though. Rather, maybe just some kids playing manhunt or something. The voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." This time I realized the voice was too deep to be a kid. And when a voice yells out, "We need help," obviously that'll always be slightly concerning. I was getting a little bit uncomfortable now, because now I was questioning if these yells were directed at me. Now I heard the voice yell, "Straight in front of you, please come help us." And the voice was coming from straight in front of me in the woods. Now I had a feeling this was directed at me. I reluctantly called back, "Who is that?" And they responded, "We just need help, we're stuck in the woods." I called back, "What does that mean?" And the voice replied back, "Just please come help, straight in front of you." I got out from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and proceeded towards the woods. I called out, "I'm coming, where are you?" The voice replied instantly, "Right in front of you, I see you." I replied back, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" There was no answer this time. I stopped in my tracks about halfway towards the woods. I had a bad feeling in my gut about this. I started walking backwards, back towards the house and the deck. I didn't even want to turn my back to the woods, because it took me that long to realize there was something very suspicious about this situation. I made it back to the deck, and the voice didn't say anything else. If they truly saw me and this was real, they would have said something like, "Where are you going?" at the very least. They knew I was onto the situation, but who even knows how many people were in there? Could have been one, could have been three. All I know is getting stuck in the woods makes absolutely no sense, especially if he or they were able to literally see me. Like what? Did their shirt get caught on a branch? I went inside the house and locked all the doors just to be safe. I chilled in my living room for a bit, still high, and I think that's why I was more trusting at first, because of how high and relaxed I was. Then though, I heard the voice again from outside, closer now, definitely in the backyard and not the woods anymore. I heard splashing of water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I hurried to the window to see. I didn't see anyone at first, but then the voice called, "I see you," with a laugh. I noticed him. It was one guy, at least one guy visible. He was hidden behind the pool on the other side, and I could only see his head. It was just too dark to make out anything besides his dark, medium-length hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. Maybe he'd lose interest if he saw I wasn't entertaining him. He was probably a sick, deranged person who enjoyed messing with people, so I didn't want to give him what he wanted. But my breaking point was when there was a horrible, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and on the other side, the guy was screaming help. I screamed at the top of my lungs to "Fuck off, you freak, the police are coming." I screamed it over and over, trying to make myself sound crazier than him. I heard him start to laugh on the other side of the glass. His laughing started to fade away as I assume he walked away. I sat back down on the couch, trembling, shaking, out of breath. I sat there for a while, and it seemed like the guy had really given up. I still got a good night's sleep that night because weed helps me sleep. I wonder if I would have handled that situation any differently if I wasn't high though. The situation made me more paranoid about who I opened my door to. I'm 23 years old, and I live at home with my parents still. One day they were both not home, and I was outside playing basketball in the front yard. At some point while I was playing, I looked up at one of our upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. Not my mom, not my sister. It was a random woman. I guess when she saw me looking at her, she dipped away from the window. When I went inside and upstairs to check the lounge room, she wasn't anywhere. I checked every single room I could, every bedroom, the bathroom, every closet. Then I checked the downstairs, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one bedroom, and more closets. Finally, I checked the basement, and I highly doubted she could be down there. It's a small basement with a couple couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places for someone to hide, but when I opened the second closet door, I was incredibly scared, as I didn't know of any other places someone could be hiding in the house. This was the last unchecked spot that I could think of. I yanked the door open as if I were ripping off a band-aid, and like I did with the closet before this one, I right away pushed myself into the closet just in case that woman was in there and I'd have the jump on her. But all I pushed myself into was a bunch of coats and coat hangers. I was so confused. I wasn't going to question my sanity though. I definitely saw that woman and I knew it. It wasn't the kind of thing you would just so vividly imagine. I went back to the middle floor and screamed very loud that whoever was in the house needs to get the F out. I actually screamed so loud that our next door neighbor came over and asked if I was okay. I told him that I literally just saw a woman at our upstairs window watching me play basketball. He came in and helped me search again. When we couldn't find her, I was left to assume that she snuck out through the back door, which I did unlock after all when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. So my neighbor left. I locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the crazy story, and they weren't too thrilled. But they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I did just that, and luckily it seemed anything that was worth something was still in place. So now fast forward to that night. I went to sleep after checking the house one more time just for peace of mind. It was hard to fall asleep though. My mind was racing for obvious reasons. Most people can't relate to seeing a stranger at their window inside of their house. But my restlessness helped me out in this situation, and here's why. I was finally starting to drift away slightly. Then I heard some noises from the other side of me. I had the fan on above me, so the room wasn't dead silent, and that's why I didn't immediately turn to my other side at the first sound I heard. But the sound started to sound human-like. I turned to my other side, and there she was, getting out from under my bed. She stood up tall above the bed, and I screamed so loud, louder than earlier before. I jumped out of my bed and tackled her to the floor and had my hand around her throat, asking her who she was. My doorbell rang, my neighbor again. I picked the tall, dirty-looking woman up off the floor and dragged her to the front door with me as she struggled and scratched at me. I still have 2 scars on my right arm from her claws. I opened my front door to my neighbor again, and he let himself in and helped me restrain the woman. This was when I called the police. The whole time we waited for the police, the woman was screaming and cursing at my neighbor and I, threatening us too. The best way to put it, she looked and acted like a meth head currently suffering from withdrawals. When the police arrived, one of the officers knew exactly who the woman was. They had dealt with her multiple times before. Her name was conveniently Karen. It was satisfying to watch her be brought into the back of the police car. I let my neighbor know how grateful I was for him coming so quickly to help. And that night, my mind continued to race. But instead of being completely freaked out, which I still was a little, I felt this overwhelming feeling of satisfaction. And I can't fully explain why. I grew up in a small town in central Arkansas. Every deer season around November, my family and I would go to our hunting cabin near Mena, Arkansas. My great-grandpa built the cabin in 1984. It was a nice cabin for the time. It's slightly outdated now, but it worked fine for my family and friends and I. 2 years ago, my friends Austin and Cody went with me to the cabin in late October for a pre-season hunt called muzzleload hunting. We were scouting an area about a mile from the cabin looking for any signs of deer because we were considering putting a stand near the spot. After splitting up and wandering around trying to find an area with the best lines of sight for a stand, I came across a pile of rocks in the woods. After closer inspection, I realized it was a grave belonging to a man named Ed Crane. We were not bothered, more interested than anything. We snapped a couple pics, and after finding a decent spot for a stand, we headed back to the cabin. Cody tried doing some research to find anything out about Ed Crane, but he didn't come up with a whole lot. Fast forward 3 weeks, we're back at the cabin for the official modern gun season. This time it's just Austin and I. We were sitting in the cabin discussing where we should go for opening day, and I decided I would try out the stand we had previously put up during muzzleloading season. Austin went about 1.5 miles the other direction towards a small lake off the property to hunt. I left the cabin around 4:45 a.m. because I had about 1.5 miles walk and wanted plenty of time to walk slow and get to the stand before daylight. This isn't a national forest and you cannot drive any vehicles into the hunting trails. We split up at the end of the road, me going left towards the stand and Austin going the opposite direction. It was a normal walk for the most part. I've been in these woods since I was 9 years old, and a mile walk was nothing out of the ordinary. I finished my walk and approached the stand, trying to be quiet as to not scare any deer that are bedding in the area. As the sun slowly started to rise, I couldn't help but keep looking over to my right to see the grave we had previously found. It was around 30 yards from where I was sitting, and it was thinly buried in surrounding brush. There was just enough light to make out the mound of rocks through the leaves. I saw something move out of the left side corner of my vision. This was not frightening at all. I'm completely used to seeing movement early in the morning while hunting. If anything, this was exciting. I turned fully to the left, but I could not locate what I was looking at. There was no movement. About that time, I heard, "Hey," in an almost whisper scream coming from behind me. This made me physically jump so hard that I shook the stand. I flung my head around backwards, but there was nothing there that I could make out. After turning on my headlamp and panning my surrounding area for at least 5 to 6 minutes, I took out my hand radio. While shaking, I radioed to Austin asking if he was near me. I got no response. I continued calling in on the radio, while looking back and forth for the next 20 minutes. Daylight was approaching, and after chalking it up to being in my head, I finally started to calm down. The sun rose up over the trees, burning off the thin layer of fog that was covering the woods. This is around 7 a.m. now. I had almost forgotten about the incident when I heard it again. This time, "Hey Caleb." It was in the same whisper-type scream as before. This time it was enough. I grabbed my bag and gun so fast. I accidentally left the hand radio in the seat beside me in the stand. I climbed down the ladder so fast I almost slipped off. I hit the ground and speed walked all the way back to the cabin, peering over my back every 10 to 20 steps. I opened the cabin door, and Austin was nowhere to be seen. He was still hunting. When Austin finally did return to the cabin, he was confused. He kept asking if that was me screaming into the radio. I explained to him my experience, and I explained I never screamed. His radio was clipped to his belt while he was standing in the doorway trying to make sense of what had happened, and right as we were talking about it, his radio started making this incoherent screeching sound. Not a static sound. It sounded organic, like some kind of animal was making it. We listened intently and sat the radio right beside us for the rest of the day. It never happened again. We came back later that week with our other friend Cody, and I looked for my radio in the stand and on the ground around it. It was nowhere to be found. Needless to say, we no longer hunt in that spot. We don't even hunt anywhere in that direction past the gate. It was the weirdest, most unexplainable experience of my life. It was a cold December night. I was hanging out with a few friends, Todd and Tristan. We were bored and had nothing to do. So one of us came up with the idea of going to the nearby train station platform to take some pictures and goof off. The platform isn't far from our houses. When we got there, we started taking pictures of the liminal space we found ourselves in. After hanging out there for a little while, it started getting even colder and we were hungry. So we started to head to our car. The path back takes us on a long footbridge across a canal. We spent some time on the bridge joking around and taking more pictures. The mood could not have been better, but the cold was getting to us, so we started back on our way again. The bridge was not wide enough for the three of us to walk side to side. I was walking in front, Todd and Tristan behind me. We were joking and chatting as we walked. Tristan said something funny, and I turned, still walking and laughing at what he said, when I noticed a man walking just feet behind Tristan. He looked to be in his late 30s. His face was dirty and he was wearing a black and white plaid shirt and ball cap. His arms were down at his sides. In one hand was a cigarette, and in the other was a large kitchen knife, clear as day. My blood ran cold when I saw it. I quickly spun back around, pretending I hadn't seen him. For some reason I thought that was the best thing to do. My fight or flight kicked in, and I found myself speed walking to the end of the bridge. I hoped that my friends would catch on and match my pace. I glanced back at them to check, and thankfully they were right on my tail. But the man was too. He was now so close that an outsider would have thought he was part of our group. He stepped off the bridge and took a path going to the right, my friends still having no idea the man was even back there. Fearing I was about to need to defend myself, I held my tripod up like an axe. The man seemed to get the memo and took the path to the left. We walked a little bit further before I pointed him out to Todd, and I gave him a quick rundown of the situation we almost found ourselves in. Walking backwards, we watched the man disappear into the darkness, and we hurried back to the car. We drove to the nearest gas station where we got food and talked it over. The whole situation was just a weird story, up until a few days ago when I was checking the pictures I had taken that night. This picture shows Todd under a light on the station platform, but just beyond the light, almost behind a freight car, is the silhouette of the man. The picture was taken at least 30 minutes before the situation on the bridge, meaning he was watching us, waiting for us to put the cameras down and turn our backs. You hear stories of things like this happening, but you never expect it to happen to you. I still get chills thinking about how differently it could have gone. My husband was in the military, and after we got married, we bought a house in a small town in North Carolina. Despite being considered a military town, it really was not a safe area to be in. One night we even heard gunshots down the street from us. But anyway, because of his job, he was gone for training operations often, and he also worked nights when he wasn't having to travel. This meant I was home alone most of the time. At the time of this story, I was in college full-time, so I was able to fill my days with lots of studying and homework to pass the time he wasn't home. One night when I was writing an essay, I was laying in bed with our dog Simba, and we both heard what sounded like rustling coming from above our heads. Simba started barking and growling, which is unusual for him. He's a pit bull mix, and despite people thinking they're scary dogs, he is a huge baby and had never acted like this before. I thought it was mice, so I texted my husband and he agreed. He told me he'd call pest control the following day so I wouldn't have to worry about laying bait and traps myself. 2 days later, pest control came and did what I thought was a thorough inspection of the house. There was some evidence of mice and roaches in the attic, so he laid some baits and also sealed some entry points in our home. However, over the next week, the rustling kept getting worse and worse, and was always at nighttime. And every time I would hear it, Simba would freak out, and at one point his hair was literally standing up on his back. This started to really freak me out, so when I called my husband after this happened, he assured me that it was the mice and they were just freaking Simba out. Later that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I thought I heard footsteps from above. But since my dog didn't hear it, I thought I was just psyching myself out. Being home alone so often, I did have some anxiety, especially at nighttime, because I didn't feel safe without my husband home. The next day I slept in pretty late and had woken up with a fever, so I wasn't feeling great. I got up to let Simba outside. The layout of the house was odd. You had to go into the garage to open the backyard door, and the entrance to the attic was right above it. As I was walking to the door, I felt like I was going to vomit. Not because I was sick, but because the door had a huge dirty handprint on it and a bunch of smudges from the inside. Someone had been in there. I assumed someone had broken in through the garage in the middle of the night, so I took a picture of the door and called the police. I texted my husband to tell him what was going on while I waited for the police, but unfortunately he couldn't respond until later due to work. The police came in just a few minutes since their station was right down the street. I showed them the handprints and how I couldn't understand how someone broke in because I would have heard the garage door opening. Then I realized that maybe the rustling I was hearing wasn't mice, and that the footstep I heard was actually a person. I told this to the police, and they immediately checked the attic. It turned out, some guy who lived with his family down the street from us was a meth addict, and he had been avoiding staying at his family's house, and so he had snuck into our garage when I was gone one day, and had been living up there for a little over a week. Somehow pest control had missed him because he was hiding behind a bunch of boxes. Apparently the inspector was not as thorough as I had hoped. Our Ring security system never even picked the guy up on camera entering our home, so he must have entered another way. Thankfully, we no longer live in that house or area, and despite this happening a few years ago, I still get scared being home alone at night for any amount of time. I'm just thankful nobody got hurt. The year was 2006. I had moved into a house with my college friend Steven and his friend Heather. I worked overnight at a radio station a few times a week. To keep my body regulated, I kept the same schedule on my nights off, which means I was up all night with way too much time on my hands. Something I liked to do super late or past midnight was to stroll through a graveyard near my house. I usually brought a camera and a tape recorder to see if I could catch anything strange. I did this a few times and did capture a few photos that showed activity, including a strange mass of color near a bench. One night driving back home, I listened to the playback of the cassette tape in my car of what I had just recorded. On the tape, I had asked if there was anyone here with us, even though I was the only one there. A weird, exhausted voice replied with a simple no, as if to say we were the only ones there. When I heard this, I had just about driven off the road. I had chills and became terrified. I know this was the point of what I was trying to do, but I guess I didn't know how to react if I had actually caught something. When I came home, I woke up my roommate to seek some comfort. He was less than empathetic and told me not to bring that crap in the house. Shortly after this incident, things got weird. One night in my room, I was watching videos on my computer when the decorative leaves I had on the wall started swinging back and forth as if they had just been smacked by something. Another night, I had come home after purchasing some things at the store. I was in my room, and and I had left a plastic bag from the store on the floor. As I was lying in bed, the bag started making a crackling sound like crumpling a bag with your hands. I looked at the bag. It was just sitting there. It kept making this sound, and soon enough started moving and hopping across the floor all by itself. I jumped up, stood on my bed, and called my roommate on the phone who was upstairs. I told them to come downstairs to my room ASAP. As soon as I got off the phone, the bag immediately stopped moving and making noises. My roommate thought I was crazy when I told him what happened. He took the bag outside and checked for what he thought might have been a mouse or something in the bag, but no such thing was found. I also had one of my worst recurring nightmares in that room. I've had a recurring nightmare since I was a kid, where I feel like my eyes are being forced shut into sleep. It happens after I wake up or before I fall asleep. My teeth always start chattering, and I can barely make any audible speech to tell it to go away. I have never known what this was. The times this has happened to me, a few unpleasant things have come along with it. One time I felt hands grabbing at me. Another time I saw a horrifying face in the closet. One night in the room I began drifting off into sleep early, and in between being awake and being asleep, this thing started up again. It was very weak at first, and I taunted it, saying, "Is that the best you can do?" But it became powerful and hard to fight. It felt like 30 full seconds of not being able to get out of this powerful force. I couldn't move, and I felt like my body was being spun around, even though it wasn't. Finally, it stopped. I don't know if this is some sort of sleep paralysis, or if what was happening in the room had anything to do with it. Early one morning at 5 a.m., what sounded like huge footsteps walking through somewhere in our place shook the whole house. Everyone was asleep except for me, of course lying in bed. It couldn't have been Steven upstairs, he was never this loud. We lived near a military base, so maybe it was from that, but the way the loud booming stomps moved in succession was like some giant person walking through. All these things were confusing and mysterious, but it wasn't until one night when I snapped a picture of the three of us in the living room that my roommate and I knew that we had a presence in the house. We were having a party. What you're looking at is me taking a picture of us in the living room with our giant mirror on the wall. I was holding my camera as still as I could, yet there seems to be activity all around us. I have no idea what those weird strings of lights are to the right of the lamp. We have nothing that would give off any kind of light like that in the house. To the right of that, there seems to be a strange mass of light imitating a figure, but the weirdest of all is the rising mass of yellow light coming between Steven and I, which looks to have eyes, a face, and a sinister smile atop a body. Maybe that yellow is a reflection from our kitchen light, but there's a lot of it. I've also tried retaking the same picture, and those yellow lights don't come up anymore. I don't know if something from the cemetery had followed me home or if there was already a presence before we moved in, but what I told you was the worst of it. And about 10 months later, we moved out of that house, not telling any future tenant or renter about it. A friend of mine, who I'll call John, was 27 at the time, and his former buddy, who I'll call Rich, was around the same age. Rich was a very daring man, if you will. John at the time was struggling with life decisions and had very little friends. Rich and John belong to a hobby group of people who are interested in fire alarms, exit signs, and other life safety equipment. Kind of an unusual hobby, but they're out there. Rich had a problem with going into abandoned buildings and stealing these devices and often bringing them home, adding them to his collection or otherwise selling them on eBay. While John didn't think it was right, he was desperate for a friend and went along with him on his adventure. But this adventure very well became a nightmare for John. On November 18th, 2019, they settled off for a trip to Gary, Indiana. And if you don't know Gary, it's not the safest place on the planet, to say the least. The trip would entail staying at a hotel in the nearby town of Hammond and heading into several abandoned schools so Rich could basically steal old and oftentimes rare life safety equipment. It was going well for them until November 20th. This day at approximately 7 at night, John and Rich went to the abandoned Horace S. Norton Elementary School at 1356 Harrison Boulevard. They started making their way through the first floor. The doors were wide open, and I mean wide open. The building smelled like sewage, skunk, and shit all mixed together. They made their way to the north end wing of the building. John watched Rich rip down several old exit signs. Again, John and I are against that, but John was desperate for a friend. As they made their way down to the south side of the building, they entered the cafeteria. It was pitch black except for the beam of their flashlights. and there was some graffiti, desks, and books scattered. You know, the typical abandoned building scenes. John was taking pictures throughout. After the cafeteria, they made their way to the gym. Little did John know his life was about to change forever. John noticed a trail of blood with his flashlight, and out of curiosity decided to follow it, and what it led to was quite disturbing. A 27-year-old female laid there dead in a pool of blood. It was gruesome as hell. Her arms were up, with her hands in the shape of a dinosaur, as John put it. Just the way John described the scene to me made me lose sleep for a couple nights. John screamed and ran into Rich, and Rich whispered, "Shh, they may hear us." John was shaken up and showed Rich the body, to which he said, "Just don't say anything to anybody and we'll pretend this never happened." They left immediately, but obviously shaking. As soon as they got back to the hotel, John called the police. Sure enough, the woman had been missing for 2 days prior. It didn't take long for the police to track down a text conversation between the woman, who was now identified as 27-year-old Adriana Saucedo, and her murderer. She was planning to buy some weed and an iPhone apparently, and the suspects had intended to rob her. The robbery went wrong, and they ended up killing her. Not before dragging her body into the gym of the elementary school and casually dumping it there just a day before John and Rich went there. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the police to track down the teen murderer and put him in custody. The teen also turned in 2 others as well. All of these kids were charged as adults, and the story is on the news as well. John is no longer friends with Rich, for obvious reasons, and this event still haunts John and I to this day.
These are 5 videos with unexplainable background stories. There is an unknown creature in England known as Messie by sewer maintenance. It was discovered during a regular maintenance survey. There had been previous reports of strange happenings in the sewers occurring on other routine maintenance jobs, however nothing as conclusive as this following piece of footage. Workers have been reporting hearing noises from within the tunnels for years. One worker even called the police as he thought someone was stuck in the pipes. The noises have been described as being almost human. One worker described the sounds as being similar to a woman coughing or choking violently. The water company manager has come out and said that several employees have reported sightings of some kind of animal in the sewers. He's reviewed the CCTV footage, and he himself stated that it certainly did not look like a typical sewer rat. It was assumed that the creature was feeding on fat deposits that have built up on the inside of the pipes. According to workers, the creature still remains unidentified to this day. On February 25, 2014, a nude male body washed ashore on a beach in England. The man was wearing only socks and one shoe, but the police made a strange discovery. A set of headphones were found in the man's mouth, as well as a rolled-up sock. The white headphones were looped around the back of the sock and were trailing out of his mouth. A number of items were found nearby, including a jacket, a wallet, and a photo of a young child. The victim was identified as 64-year-old Alan Geel, and the child in the photo was Alan when he was 2. Alan did have surviving family, however he was a loner, so suicide was considered a possibility. Alan had recently purchased a weighted training vest and ankle weights, which suggested that he may have been planning to drown himself. However, these weights were never found, and the unexplained injuries to Alan's chest and head meant foul play could not be ruled out. The day before his body was found, Alan had traveled from Waterbridge to Truro and was seen wandering through the area on CCTV footage. The most intriguing video showed him speaking with individuals at a bus station, but they were never identified. Alan was last photographed in Purenporth on February 24, 2014. The strangest detail from the CCTV footage showed Alan wearing a completely different jacket than the one found on the beach. The jacket that he wore in the footage was never recovered. The rest of his clothing and his bank and credit cards are also missing. No one knows what Alan was doing in Purenporth that night, or how his body ended up in the water. In 2009, Stephen Kosher quit his job in Salt Lake City and moved to St. George, Utah. After months of struggling to find a job, Stephen left St. George on December 12, 2009. The following day, he called two of his friends and claimed that he was in Las Vegas. Stephen never offered any explanation for his trip, but his family believes that he may have been looking for a job. These phone calls were the last time anyone ever heard from Stephen before he mysteriously vanished without a trace. His abandoned car was located in a residential neighborhood in Henderson, Nevada, with wrapped Christmas presents that Stephen had purchased for his family in the back of the vehicle. Investigators eventually found this video of Stephen taken on December 14, 2009, from a camera at a residence in the Henderson neighborhood. The video shows Stephen parking his car, crossing the street, walking down the sidewalk, and then disappearing out of sight. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. It's unknown why Stephen parked his car in the upscale neighborhood, though it's been speculated that it could have been because it seemed like an unlikely place for him to become the victim of some kind of violent crime. His cell phone signal was picked up at various locations by a tower several miles away, but the signal died after 2 days. With his employment and financial difficulties, some people have speculated that Stephen may have staged his disappearance to start a new life. However, there has been no trace of him for about 6 years. The following video is from a surveillance camera taken in November of 2007 in Fresno, California. It was positioned to record the owner's front lawn and was set up because someone had tried stealing something from the owner's yard on a previous occasion. On the night the video was caught, the owner was woken by his dogs barking in an unusual way. He got up and looked at his security monitor and saw the creatures, about 2 to 3 feet tall, moving across his lawn. He grabbed a camcorder and recorded the monitor screen. Local investigators presented the footage at a mutual UFO network conference. The video they shared also showed some footage of the owner and the front yard during the day. Since it's a video of a video, the quality isn't great. The TV show Fact or Faked investigated the video. The crew went to the home it was filmed at and tried recreating it with a few different experiments. In the end, they determined the video footage to be unexplainable. The end of the video also shows some footage of the creatures, that are by the way referred to as the Nightcrawlers, allegedly caught by someone else in Fresno a few years later. The TV show Paranormal Borderline received an anonymous letter in the mail providing enough information to warrant further investigation. It told the story of a worker who appeared to have been abducted by aliens. The letter was accompanied by a tape which allegedly shows the abduction. There are 4 black and white pictures. On the top right quadrants, a worker walks right to left through a gate. He disappears here in a flash of light at 11:16 p.m. The tape continued to run normally until almost 2 hours later. Then the victim reappears in a second flash of light in a fetal position. Then moments later, now crouching, he vomits and seconds later staggers right to left out of frame. According to the author of the letter, the footage was copied from a surveillance system. He reports that soon after the incident, the victim quit his job and moved away. Hired experts couldn't make any valid or concrete conclusions, and there are still no explanations for the flashes, missing time, or just what happened to the worker on that night. Number 5. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave out a low, raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone laying on my nightstand, right where I left it. Number 4. When I was a kid, I was always the last kid to get picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day I was waiting for the bus by myself and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now. Just get on." He got more and more pushy but didn't do anything crazy. I just kept saying no and he shrugged and left. The real bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school and my parents didn't know until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls. Number 3. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened the door and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets, dog shit, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night I had my girlfriend staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed, looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night and who knows how long she stood there. "You should lock your doors at night," she says and walks out. The next morning I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongue. She has a plastic bag in her hand with her rotting dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside and I can smell death from that bag. At this point I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask them what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch, staring at him holding a power drill. Come to think about it, now I know what was in her hand. At this stage, I'm basically shitting myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently she's a violent schizophrenic and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution, and in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again. Still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep. Number 2. I was about 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office, so I get up and go check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is made especially weird because I'm working in the industrial district at 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open. I go back to my desk, put a quick call through to security to let them know and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more and end up running to my car, getting in and taking off. I'm almost home and I've started to calm down a bit when I realized that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked the whole time. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murderers that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward about 30 minutes. I've called a friend of mine who says he's out drinking, so I decide I'm going to join him. I jump on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's a nice night and I'm in no big rush, just enjoying the moonlight when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly, and when he's right beside me, he shoots me a smile, and I can describe it as purely insane. I kind of flinch and am taken aback as he rides on. That's when I realize he's riding my mom's bike. Needless to say, I sprint the hell home. When I get there, sure enough, her bike is missing and one of my car's doors is open, the back left one. I was driving and had no need to open that door. Number 1. I worked at a campground on night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my PS2 and game a good portion of the night, only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot shack, with nothing around but dark all night. My first week there, the other third shift guy who was quitting told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it rang every night at 4:17 a.m., just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he guessed. He's never answered it himself. I go for a few months with the job. It was the middle of the summer, so most nights I had the windows closed, so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. Mid-August, I started leaving the windows open during the night. Sure enough, at 4:17 a.m. every morning, the phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water and then put where it sat. One night I got up the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and would go wait at the phone until it rang. When it did, I answered it, but there was no sound, just dead air like someone was on the other line but wasn't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same results. I didn't think anything of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October, I decided to answer the phone once again. I set my alarm and when the time came, I answered the phone. I repeatedly said hello into the phone. Then I heard what sounded like someone inhaling through clenched teeth. The voice that sounded was rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. He said my name, my complete name, first, middle, and last. It was a voice I've never heard. My voice caught in my throat and I hung up. I rattled some change into the payphone and hit *69. The number had come from California. I lived in Indiana.
I'm a police officer in South Jersey. I've been doing this since I was 23. For the most part, it's not as exciting as it's cracked up to be. Not a whole lot happens in my county. Usually the worst calls are disturbance calls or an occasional shoplifting, with something a little more serious sprinkled in there once in a blue moon. I've done just about every possible shift there is. I did my time on the night shift, and there were definitely some weirder calls during the night shift than the day shift. But this one time I was working the night shift, I didn't get any calls. I was just cruising on a quiet road with no streetlights and woods on both sides. I saw the reflection of taillights suddenly approaching on the right-hand side of the road on the grass. As I got closer, I saw that the driver's side door was open. I started to veer onto the grass as I slowed down, fully planning on getting out to see if the driver needed assistance. I saw someone step out of the car stand by the door for a second, then started to run into the woods. I radioed the codes for a suspicious person or vehicle, then got out of the car with my flashlight on and my hand on my holster just in case. In this situation, I had to expect the worst. I got to the front door of the car and looked inside, half expecting to see someone else sitting there, but the car seemed empty. There was a seriously foul odor emanating from inside the car though. It smelled like a rotting animal. I called out to the woods, asking if anybody's there and needs assistance, and I stepped to the tree line waving the flashlight around. I went back to the car to take a closer look inside the passenger side. There were multiple bloodied tissues and paper towels on the floor on the passenger side as well as the rear seats. They were soaked in blood. The entire papers were dark red. At some point while looking inside the car, I heard footsteps inside the woods. I spun around with my flashlight and yelled, "Come out of the woods." I didn't see anyone. Someone was hiding in there, and that was confirmed when I heard a deep voice somewhere beyond the trees and shrubs. I had no idea what the voice said. I responded saying, "Show yourself, are you hurt?" I prepared to unholster my gun as I walked a little closer. I repeated myself, asking, "Are you hurt?" No response. The voice I heard before didn't sound like a person in pain bleeding out. Additionally, why would they run into the woods upon seeing a police car? Something was way off. I went back to the car and requested assistance. I noticed as I investigated the car further that it had no plates, and when I went back inside of the rear, I found something that made me almost puke from shock. There was something heavy wrapped in bloodied paper towel. I unwrapped it with my gloves on to find a severed hand, and it took me a hot second to realize what it was, because it was completely dark red soaked in blood. Now this situation went from a 5 to a 10. I radioed that there was a possible murder and needed backup. I now put my cruiser's lights on to help other officers more easily identify my location. When backup arrived, we did a thorough search of the woods, looking for possible blood trails. Nothing though. There were not even any blood trails leading from the car, which meant that the hand and blood on the tissues I found may not have been from the person who I saw run into the woods. Eventually the canine unit had to come and search for the person. Hours upon hours went into this search, well past dawn, turning up nothing. The vehicle was taken into custody. It had been reported stolen by a resident of a nearby town, who said he had no idea who could have stolen his car. Fingerprints had been collected from the steering wheel, and DNA testing had been done on the hand. There was not a single match to anybody in the database. To this day, there was never any progress in finding out who the driver of that car was, and whose severed hand that was. My partner and I are assigned to a unit in the sheriff's department that handles tethers, or ankle monitors. One night while looking for someone that absconded the program, we followed her last known location to a somewhat shady area of our county. Not many stops are routine, but this one was unsettling from the beginning. My partner walked to the front door, as I held the side of the house, keeping my focus on him and the side of the house. After knocking on the door, we could hear movement from inside. As the door opened, a middle-aged woman slowly peered out of the door and looked directly at me. There was no way she knew where I was standing. I was not in view of any window at the front or side of the house. What was strange was that most people would answer the person at the front door, not look at the side of the house first. After a moment, she let us in after we asked if she knew who Camille was, who we were searching for. She mumbled something to the effect that she was there. Things went from 0 to 100 immediately, as she dropped to her hands and knees and started scooting on the floor yelling for Camille. This lady had some obvious mental issues, and we figured this Camille was a caretaker of some kind. We both knew the situation was off, but started searching the house. The entire time this woman was yelling for Camille, never once getting back to her feet, just kind of following us on the ground. The time must have been around 8 p.m. and it was dark outside. The inside of the home had one light on. There were no TVs or any electronics of any kind. The house had a strange feeling to it. The layout of this older style home had about 4 bedrooms and 2 floors. Every time I left a room, I swear I was in a part of the house I had not just been in. I would enter a hallway and seemingly be in another part of the house, like I entered a dimensional gap or something. The woman would sometimes be right behind me without making a sound. I was starting to question how all of this was possible. At one point, we both entered the upstairs, which looked to be a regular upstairs with bedrooms, or maybe a bathroom at the top of the stairs. As we tried to open the door, initially it would not budge. It appeared that it had been sealed somehow, like it had been painted over, and paint had dried in the seams of the door. After putting in a little extra effort, the door opened, revealing an attic, not bedrooms. If you remember Paranormal Activity, when the guy finds a picture of his wife and child in the insulation, that's what it looked like. There was nothing but storage space, insulation, and an older style light bulb with a string hanging from it. The lady was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs watching us, occasionally yelling for Camille. After what seemed like an hour of searching this house over and over again, going into rooms I swear I had just left, we called it and cleared the property. As we drove off, the woman was now standing right in front of the door, staring at us as we left. According to when we called dispatch and when we cleared, we were only there for 20 minutes. It felt like we were there for well over an hour or two. I don't know what was more unsettling, the fact that it was late at night, the lady yelling Camille's name and scooting on her hands and knees, her quietly showing up behind me when I had not heard her move, or the fact that she was standing at the door just staring at us as we left. We have not returned to that house. My family and I live throughout the middle of Georgia. Not many stories come out of this area, and this one I'm about to share makes us glad of that fact. My cousin, who I'll call Bob, has been a police officer for 5 years. He went into the force bright-eyed and optimistic, I guess like so many do. It sounds corny, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and help improve the lives of the people in his community. One day, they got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Roberta. To hear Bob tell it, it was a place that people had thought was abandoned for years. Gives you an idea of the state the house was in. Anyway, when they arrived, an older gentleman was sitting on the steps outside the front door with his hand in his pockets. Bob and the other officer approached him and were alarmed to see that the man was crying. Well, not crying really, but sobbing, and he was also muttering something to himself about how awful it is. They tried to question the man, but the guy was completely incoherent. It didn't take but a couple of seconds to figure out that the poor guy was traumatized. As his partner called for another car, Bob drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell inside the house was overpoweringly rancid. He told me that the kitchen and living room were a total wreck. It was clear the owners of the house were hoarders. Pots and pans stacked damn near to the ceiling, spoiled food all over the table, takeout containers scattered all over the floor. Disgusting. As procedure dictates, Bob called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. He told me that even with all his training and experience over those past 5 years, his heart rate was already building fast. Gun at the ready, he checked out the living room and saw nobody was there either. He made his way down the hall where the smell was getting much worse. Just as it all became too much, he covered his mouth and nose and opened the door to what he suspected was the bedroom. In the bed were 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered with flies. Despite his churning stomach, Bob decided to go in for a closer look, a decision he said he's regretted since. One of the corpses was male, the other female. The skin on their faces was already starting to fall off, and the flies were flying in and out of their mouths. Some were landing and sitting on their eyeballs. As Bob inspected the female's corpse, he was horrified to find that she was holding an even smaller dead body, an infant. It wasn't until a large cockroach crawled out of the dead infant's mouth that Bob ran outside the house, doubled over, and threw up his lunch all over the steps the man had been sitting on. When the other cars finally arrived, they were able to do a more thorough inspection. The older man that Bob and his partner had met when they first arrived was a former coworker and friend of the dead man. They'd worked together at a peach packing company. The man hadn't showed up for over a week, and he'd gone to their house to see if he was okay. The poor man had been the first to see that horrible sight in the bedroom. The story that they put together was that the wife and husband had at some point become addicted to opioids. After some kind of operation a year or so before, they had started abusing painkillers together, and the addiction grew and grew until they started shooting up and snorting heroin. Their daughter, who wasn't more than a couple years old, had died of neglect. When the husband and wife discovered their baby's corpse, they finally broke completely and decided to end themselves. The coroner found enough heroin in both their bodies to kill them twice over. Bob's still on the force, but he started drinking a little too much after that. He's been going to therapy, and he's since managed to get his drinking under control. But almost every time we talk, he says that he still has nightmares about that poor child's corpse. And in his nightmares, the baby's still crying. I once responded to a call of a possible breaking and entering. A young woman living alone called in fear, saying that she came home to find a broken window downstairs, but nothing seemed to be stolen and she couldn't find anyone inside. But then when she went upstairs to bed, she thought she could hear footsteps moving around downstairs. Her call disconnected shortly after she said that, and the woman wouldn't pick up to any of the attempted callbacks. I took the call and arrived to the little house. I went to knock on the front door, and after a minute, I gave it another set of knocks and pressed the doorbell. After another minute, I tried one more time, this time banging really loudly and ringing the bell again. When there was no answer this time, I decided to inspect the house. I walked around the house, and I found the busted window. It was a window big enough to crawl through with ease. I stuck my head into the dark house and yelled, "It's the police." It was silent. I radioed to dispatch that the house seemed silent. More officers were en route, but I didn't feel right waiting around in case there was someone truly in danger in the house. I radioed that I'm going into the house through the window, and then I climbed through it. I stepped over the shattered glass into the kitchen. I drew my gun and started walking through the kitchen, hearing the glass crunching below my boots. I shouted into the house to make my presence as a police officer known to anyone who was inside. I didn't hear any footsteps, so I went upstairs, as the woman on the phone told dispatch that she heard footsteps downstairs, so that would mean her bedroom was upstairs. I wasn't trying to be too quiet as I went up the stairs, but I also wasn't stomping around. I didn't know what to expect, if someone with a weapon was in the house, or if the woman was just alone in bed. I said, "Ma'am, it's a police officer. Are you here?" And I heard back a soft female voice from upstairs saying yes. I followed the voice to one of the bedrooms, where I saw a woman sitting up in her bed under the covers. She looked at me, and I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I noticed a slight tremble in her voice. I kept the lights to the bedroom off as I looked at her. There was enough natural moonlight in the room that I could examine her facial expression. She looked distressed. I told her I was responding to her phone call, and then I asked her why she hung up and didn't pick up the callbacks. She stuttered and said no one is here. I caught on to what was going on. I looked at the closet and made a slight head nod to her. She very slightly shook her head no. I looked down under the bed and pointed, and she shook her head yes. The weight of the pressure of what to do next was 1,000 pounds. The best idea I came up with on the spot was telling her, "All right, ma'am, I just need you to sign this report form stating that I was here and there was nothing unusual." She said okay and got up from the bed and came over to me. And when she was close enough, I pushed her out of the room and then drew my gun and yelled, "Come out from under the bed." I was still shook when I saw a dark figure actually slowly coming out from under the bed. I said, "Hands first and drop any weapons." I heard the clank of something drop to the floor, which turned out to be a gun. A middle-aged man in all black clothes stepped out from under the bed with his hands up. I made the arrest on the spot and brought him outside, right around the time the other officers were arriving. The woman had hung up the phone on the police when she thought the footsteps were upstairs and she didn't want the intruder to hear the audio from the phone call. This was also why she didn't pick up the phone, because by this point the intruder entered the room and had her at gunpoint. And since the police were already coming, for whatever reason, instead of fleeing the scene, the intruder threatened to shoot the woman if she made a sound when the police came. After I had rung the bell, he hid under the bed and told her to pretend he wasn't there. I'm glad I was able to catch on to the situation. It could have gone a number of ways if I hadn't. My partner and I got a breaking and entering call late one Friday night. I'd never responded to a call like that before, but it sounded serious. A young woman was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs, but when she was on the 911 call, the call was cut before she could give her location in the house. We arrived to the home and entered through the front door, which was left unlocked, which later proved to be how the break-in occurred. Both of us shouted police with our guns drawn, expecting the suspect to be armed. We called out for Anna, that was the homeowner's name. Anna never called back to us. We knew she must have been scared and didn't want to give away her position to the intruder. We checked the whole first floor, which was small and quick. There didn't appear to be a basement. A door shutting upstairs drew my partner and I's attention. I led the way upstairs. All the doors had been shut, so I couldn't really tell which door I had just heard. I told my partner to check that one while I checked this one. I turned the doorknob and kicked the door open, immediately lifting my gun into the air. It was a dark, empty room. I heard breathing in this room, though. It sounded like a woman's breathing. I looked at the closet door, which was slid slightly open, and I saw half a face, mostly someone's eye, peeking through the opening. Resting assured it was Anna, I lowered my gun and said, "Anna, it's okay, you can come out." But she didn't, and the breathing quieted. Then my partner in the next room over called, "Jason, I found her." My feeling in that room suddenly went from at ease to ready to throw up. I raised my gun again and yelled, "Come out of the closet." They did not obey, so I called my partner into the room. He turned on the light and we opened the closet together to see this disheveled, drugged-out woman holding one of Anna's kitchen knives. With 2 guns pointed at her, she dropped the knife and we brought her into the precinct. Thank God I was stationed in a safer area of town the next year, and I haven't gotten any breaking and entering calls since then. As a state trooper for 15 years, I've experienced my share of close calls and uncomfortable situations. This happened over a decade ago when I was still relatively new to the job. I was on night patrol on an interstate about 2:30 a.m. I usually had my car parked near a bush to hide myself from view from oncoming speeding cars, but at this hour I didn't really try to hide too much. I was moving my car and pulled into a gas station that sat on the side of the interstate. It was closed, not because it was late, but rather it was temporarily out of service. I noticed 2 cars parked in the lot next to each other. There was nothing immediately suspicious about this, but I kept my eye out just because strange things happen at this hour. I parked my car in a way that I could watch the interstate as well as these 2 parked cars. I realized that I didn't see anyone in either of those cars though. Now this was quite suspicious. The station was closed and there were no workers here. I exited my car with my hands on my belt and approached the 2 cars. I tapped on the windows for the both of them. Nobody in either of them, as I suspected. I began to walk around the lot as the occasional car zipped down the interstate. I went up to the glass of the closed gas station and knocked on it. I turned around, dumbfounded. Whose cars were these? Just as I imagined they could be in the woods somewhere, I heard someone running from around the building and ask for my help. He was some young 20-something-year-old man, like me at the time. He said his car wouldn't start and needed help. Now, I told him right away that I was no mechanic and that he'd need to call a towing company, but he practically begged me to just check under the hood for a second. He ran to his driver's side and popped the hood. I looked under the hood with him, not really knowing what to look for because I wasn't much of a car guy at the time. I asked if his battery died, and when I looked at him, I took note that he was looking around very oddly. He replied, "I don't think so." I then looked at the car parked next to him. "Whose car is that?" I asked him. He said he didn't know. He simply parked there to see if there was a porta potty in the back or something. I was reading through this kid's bullshit. Something was up here. As I looked back at the guy from the 2 cars, I saw him looking back at something or someone. I turned and saw another guy approaching me with a knife in his hand. I unholstered my gun and aimed it at him. He dropped the knife and put his hands up. They both did. I immediately called for backup while keeping the 2 at gunpoint. I cuffed the one who was holding the knife and placed him in the back of my car, and then grabbed the second pair from my glove box and cuffed the second guy. When backup arrived, I went to the back of the gas station where the first guy had originally approached me from. What I found there still holds up to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in all of my years as a trooper. There were 2 fresh, dead bodies wrapped in garbage bags, cut up in 2 pieces each to fit in the bags. Along with them was also a shovel sitting on the concrete by the woods. The 2 were planning on burying the bodies somewhere in the woods off the interstate, and it seemed they were in a hurry. These 2 were a couple of the dumbest people I had ever interacted with, being that out of anywhere in the state, they chose to bury 2 bodies off an interstate behind a gas station. Going to sleep at night knowing you almost had your throat slit by somebody on the job messes with you, and I didn't get much sleep for a while. I'm a rookie cop currently working the night shift. I'm just a normal patrol officer conducting traffic stops and responding to basic 911 calls. 2 nights in a row last week, I was called to the same house. Dispatch had called me to check out the house as someone had dialed 911 and hung up. The house was a couple miles from me, in my patrol zone. I arrived to the house quickly and turned up the dirt driveway through the trees onto the property. The house was dark, no lights on, no cars, nothing. I parked my squad car on the far right side of the property and went to the front door, taking note that all the windows were properly shut. I knocked on the door and no answer. The door was also locked. For my immediate guess, the place was abandoned, for years by the looks of it. I called to dispatch that the place was abandoned and nobody was there. Then I left. The next night I was working the same shift, and around a similar time, I got a call from dispatch that there was another 911 call from the same house. Only this time, someone could be heard crying on the other end before the call ended. I was asked to check out the house again. This time I was a little further away, but still the drive wasn't too bad. I pulled up the dirt driveway again onto the property, and again, no lights, no cars. I approached the front door again, and this time it was left cracked open. I knocked on the door while holding the doorknob to prevent the door from pushing open. No answer. I called to dispatch that I would be entering the house, which I was cleared to do since the crying over the line implied an urgent situation inside the house. I drew my gun and entered the house. I tried to find a light switch without luck. I had my gun in one hand and now my flashlight in the other. The house was mostly silent, besides the sound coming from behind a closed door. It was the basement door. I called to dispatch for backup in a whisper. The sound coming from down in that basement was a tone, like a dial tone of a phone. I started walking down the stairs as quietly as possible. I got to the bottom and followed the noise of the dial tone to an old, early 2000s style landline speakerphone. The phone was off the hook, and it was playing the dial tone on speakerphone. I put the phone on the hook to silence the noise, and it was almost as if it were planned to happen like this. As soon as the phone hit the hook, I heard a muzzled laughing type noise in a far corner of the basement. I turned around, and there was some guy standing opposite me in the basement, with his hand over his mouth, and he appeared to be laughing. But it wasn't this genuine laugh, it was more like a sickly, mentally unstable laugh. The guy was holding something in his other hand. I couldn't see what it was at first, but when he raised his hand up to his head, I realized he was holding a revolver. I aimed my gun at him and yelled to drop the weapon. He paused as he had his revolver to his head, apparently about to pull the trigger, so I shot him in the arm twice, causing him to drop the gun. He screamed in pain as I cuffed him and brought him upstairs. I requested a medical team at once. A second squad car pulled up, as did an ambulance a few minutes later. The scariest part about this for me was not that I had to shoot a man in the arm twice, but that I was mere seconds away from seeing a man spray his brains out onto the wall. My partner and I got a radio call of a welfare check, which is just a check on the welfare of a person. A woman's ex-boyfriend called because he received text from his ex stating that she wished it had never ended and that she could no longer go on without him. We get to the place, knock, pound, etc. No answer. We call the number the ex provided and get an answer and a hang-up, so we hear it from the outside window and know she's in there. We say we're going to break the door down if she doesn't answer. We hear some slurred mess of speech. Door unlocks but doesn't open. We open the door to find a young woman, wet, naked, pale as hell, and swaying in one spot, her hands bleeding. We call a rescue ambulance and she's off to the hospital. Now to the creepy part. None of the lights would turn on, so we conduct a safety search and find candles lit in the bedroom and bathroom. On the walls were Bible scriptures written in her blood and a tub of brown water, the water being mixed with old blood. I don't know how she survived because that water was dark. She had been sitting in it for approximately 3 to 4 hours. Before getting transferred to a different county, I used to work as a police officer in Burlington, New Jersey. Burlington is not a safe place. They say that crime there is 88% higher than the rest of Jersey. And having worked there for a year, I got to learn that firsthand. Now there would be a lot of break-ins, robberies, assaults, and after a while you'd get used to those calls. Sometimes you'd get pretty strange, unsettling calls though. This was one of them. Most Burlington locals are familiar with the McNeil Mansion, a long abandoned mansion that sits right on the Delaware River. The home was constructed in 1894 to serve as a residence for Andrew H. McNeil, as well as his wife and 4 daughters. The house had been abandoned and left to decay since 1974 and is now owned by the county. Sometimes there would be kids trespassing on the property to check it out. Sometime past midnight, I was told over the radio by dispatch to investigate the property, as there was a report by a neighboring house that there were some people seen hopping the fence to the property. Upon entering the property, I noticed a light coming from inside one of the upstairs windows. Part of me inside died a little as I realized someone was in there and that it was my job to go in and get them out. I requested backup into my radio and stated I would be entering the mansion to pursue a trespasser. I scanned the outside of the house once more looking for an entry point, and found one of the lower windows was smashed open and easily accessible, and that's how I made my way in. Right away, first thing I did was make my presence as a police officer known. I was inside what appeared to once be the living room of the mansion, rubble covering the whole floor. I heard footsteps upstairs. I shouted again, expecting them to come down the stairs. When they didn't, that meant it was my job to come up. I went up the stairway and started walking around. There was no way to hide my steps with all the litter and rubble on the ground. I heard something fall in a nearby room. This is when the worry and fear really started to kick in. At this point, I had my hand on my gun holster ready to react. Though let me tell you, having a gun doesn't make you feel invincible. I shouted again to try and draw out the trespassers from the room. You ever hear that dumb, overused quote, "I didn't sign up for this" in the movies? Well, I was pretty much feeling that exact way. I stepped into the room that I thought was where the noise had echoed from. It was some small, weird room with a bunch of windows with blurred glass film. There was a sliding closet door open about 3/4, so they had to be in there. I took out my pepper spray and gave one more warning that I was a police officer before yanking the closet open fully. It was empty. This made no sense. I looked around the room, and the windows. They looked to an outside deck, and there was someone standing behind one of them. I couldn't see anything about their features other than the outline of their body, but then I realized there were people at the other windows too. The way they were all looking at me through the window film, such a ghostly appearance they gave, like a picture from a kid's horror novel. I found the door to that deck in an adjacent room. When I stepped out, the 3 figures standing at the windows were gone. I didn't see any other way off the deck besides the door I came out through. I saw the flashing lights of a police car through a bunch of trees, parked on the same lot as me. Another officer announced his and his partner's arrival to me over the radio. I met the officers outside the house and pointed up at the deck where I saw 3 people standing. They were creeped out as well when I described how they all just stood there at their own windows looking in. We searched the whole mansion together. I eventually came to a small room with a window on the first floor, and once again, something was outside this window. I had to step closer to figure out if it was a person's head or not. When I got too close, the object lowered below the window. I radioed the other officers to go outside with me. We looked around the whole property and didn't find anyone. We searched for another 10-15 minutes before closing up all the entrances to the house and moving on. The scariest part of this for me was definitely seeing 3 ghost-like silhouettes all standing at their own of the 3 windows to that deck, looking inside at me.
Immediately go to the nearest room and lock and barricade the door. Stay low and stay quiet.
I went to a somewhat typical high school. Not in a traditional American suburb, but a more rural set high school. Some kids go to schools with graduating classes of like 500 to hell, even 1,000 kids. My high school had, I think, a little less than 200 kids in my graduating class. It was the kind of high school where even if you weren't friends with someone, you still knew them by face and name. Walking down the hallways, you'd know basically 99% of your peers, at least in your own graduating class. Coming from a quiet town, there weren't a lot of crazy news stories, really. It was pretty uneventful there. What we did for fun after school was actually go out and play sports and ride our bikes around and stuff like that. This was like 17 years ago though, so I guess things may be a lot different these days for kids. Another thing I always felt that was unique about our school was that there didn't really seem to be any bullying for the most part. Like, at least not the typical cliche movie style bullying where kids are getting pushed into lockers or having their lunch money stolen. When I think back now, I can't really name a single kid from my graduating class who could be labeled as a bully. Sure, there were kids who just tease others, but nothing too serious. Of course, there were quiet kids in our grade, like every school has, but there was one kid in my grade who literally never spoke at all. I'm gonna just name him Luke for this story. He wasn't even a weird-looking kid or anything. He seemed pretty nice to people who went out of their way to interact with him. I shared one class with him, though. It was an elective that had kids from all 4 grades in it. Luke and I were juniors when this happened. This elective was a computer class, and back when this happened, the computer rooms in our high school were still rocking those big, bulky box computers. I remember the layout of this classroom. There was the aisle in the middle separating 2 columns of tables, and the 2 columns had 4 rows each. Each row had 4 seats, and each student had their own computer. This class wasn't full, so there were probably like 26 filled seats out of 32. Luke always sat in the second row in the furthest seat to the left with no one next to him, as everyone else sat with people they knew from their respective grades. Unfortunately, not long into the semester, the seniors in the class started collectively picking on Luke. By this, I mean some of the seniors would make jokes about how quiet Luke was, that it was scary when the teacher would ask certain things. For whatever reason, our teacher never stood up for Luke and told them to cut it out. The teacher was a bit of a pushover from what I remember. Maybe that was why. As the semester went on, it got a little worse. I remember at one point seeing a small piece of paper fly from the back row from the seniors right to the back of Luke's head. I remember he turned around and had this very telling look. The seniors continued to make fun, one of them saying, "Wasn't me," and blaming one of the other seniors. The look on Luke's face just looked like a mix of sadness, anger, and just defeatedness. I genuinely felt bad, but I didn't get involved. Eventually, one day I saw Luke sitting on a curb not far from the high school after school ended one day. I passed by him as I was walking to my car. I have an early birthday, so I was driving around halfway through junior year. Given we were in a quiet area, no one was exactly walking distance from school. So I did the right thing and said what's up, and asked if he needed a ride home. His face literally lit up a bit as he said yes. We walked to my car, and from there on, he guided me to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive to his house. We talked a lot during that car ride. I told him he should just ignore the seniors in our computer class. I said they're a bunch of deadbeats anyway. He said they're not the only ones that he's sick of. He implied that he deals with people picking on him in multiple classes, which honestly made me feel pretty terrible for him. In those 10 minutes, I felt like I learned a lot about Luke and got to know him as a person just a bit, and he seemed like a decent kid. As I dropped him off, I made a comment to him about how close we lived, and then we said goodbye. Every day in class after that, we'd say hey to each other, But admittedly, I unfortunately never got involved whenever he got picked on. Well, one day, Luke didn't show up to class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that an announcement came over the loudspeaker saying, "Lockdown, this is not a drill." I remember everyone looking around nervously, and I remember our teacher looking the most nervous. She ran to turn off the lights and told everyone to hurry to one corner of the room. Seeing how nervous our teacher was only made all the students even more nervous. We sat with the lights off for a long time. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes until there was another message on the loudspeaker. It was the principal, explaining that there was someone in a mask carrying a black duffel bag trying to get into the school. Our school had really good security, and when someone spotted that person approaching the school with what could only be assumed to be guns or any kind of weapons in that duffel bag, the doors were all locked. The school day was cut short after that once a few police cars were on the scene. I remember it being a Friday, so I took a few of my friends home to my house so we could hang out. I'd be lying if I said I remember the small details thereafter of that day, but I think it was that same night that I woke up in the middle of the night to light tapping at my window. And I could see someone on the other side of the glass. I started freaking out, and before running to get my dad, I took a closer look and then said, "Who is it?" I heard Luke's voice as he said his name. I felt like my heart dropped a second time. I went over to the window and lifted it just a crack. I said, "What are you doing? How did you find me?" And he said through the window, "I tried to do something bad." And it instantly clicked. I mean it. It instantly clicked in my head that it was him. Before he could even tell me, I said, "Was it you who caused the lockdown?" And he said yes. I was scared to ask him what he was planning on doing. Instead, I asked him how he found me. He admitted to remembering the deli that I said I lived by, and he eventually found my car after biking around the area. That explanation didn't make it any less disturbing. Luke asked me if he could come in and talk about what he planned on doing, and I said no, I cannot let him in, nor can I hear what he planned on doing. I actually recommended he go to the school and confess to whatever he was going to do, and when he refused to walk away from my window, I said "Dad" really loudly, which worked in scaring him off. I went to my parents' room and woke them up to tell them. My mom was the one who insisted on calling the police. She was distraught. When a police officer eventually came, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave Luke's identity, and I explained that he had just come to my window admitting to potentially almost doing something horrible at the school. Obviously, the police were already aware of the lockdown, so I believe police were sent to his house that night, but after speaking with Luke's parents, they realized Luke wasn't there. I believe it was the next day that Luke was either found or he just returned home and police were still waiting there, and he confessed to what he told me. As far as our graduating class knew, Luke was charged with something like making a terroristic threat. I know he did time, and I know he's been out a long time. To be honest, I don't really know if he's still around. Part of me always wanted to feel bad for Luke, witnessing how loneliness and getting picked on can probably eat away at someone. He followed me and came to me simply because I showed him an act of kindness, something I unfortunately believe nobody else showed him. Still, the fact that he admitted to bringing a gun to school with a mask on, even if he didn't admit to intending on carrying out the implied threat, I can't fully believe he simply came to the school with a gun just to scare people. I think he for a split second had a horrible plan and got cold feet and regretted it. I just hope Luke eventually got the help he needed. This happened in 2016, back when I was in 5th grade. If you remember that year, you probably remember all the killer clown sightings that were happening around the country. At the time, it was all over the news and social media. Most adults thought it was just some dumb trend or prank, but for young kids, it was actually pretty scary. It was a normal day at school. I went to an elementary school in a quiet suburban area where I still live. Nothing weird ever really happens here. It was around 1 p.m. I'm guessing, because it was closer to the end of the school day. We were in class working on some random assignment, and the classroom was quiet except for a few people whispering. Then, one of the students in my class suddenly said out loud, "There's a clown outside." I still remember her high-pitched voice as she said it. Some of us stood up and looked toward the window, and yeah, There really was a clown outside. He was standing just a few feet away from the window, facing our classroom directly. He was wearing a baggy, dirty red and yellow clown suit and had white face paint with black around the eyes. He was smiling and staring in at us with this big fake grin. After a few seconds, he started waving slowly. Some of the kids thought it was funny and laughed. Others were clearly freaked out. Our teacher, Mrs. Riker, walked over to the window, looked at the guy for a second, and then said through the glass, loud and annoyed, "Excuse me, classes are in session, you need to get out of here." The clown didn't react at all. He just kept standing there, smiling and waving. Mrs. Riker told us all to sit back down and said she was calling the front office. She picked up the corded classroom phone and then walked into the hallway with it and spoke quietly. The phones in the classrooms were always next to the door, so that's how she was able to walk outside the room with it. She came back in moments later and then hung up. She walked over to the window and shut all the blinds after she saw that the man in the clown costume was still there, doing the same creepy waving motion, smiling, and general clownish mannerisms. Not even 2 minutes later, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." There was a sense of urgency in the voice that, looking back, was probably to alert the teachers that it wasn't a drill without causing all the kids to go into a panic. That's when it got serious. Mrs. Riker rushed to turn off the lights and told us all to get under our desks. She pulled the door shut and locked it. Everyone was quiet. Some kids were giggling, but others looked scared. I was definitely scared. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but it was actually about 30 minutes. Nobody knew what was happening, but eventually, the principal came back on the loudspeaker and said the lockdown was over and that the situation had been handled. Apparently, school security had confirmed that the clown was gone. They didn't tell us anything else. Classes went on like normal for the rest of the day. It felt weird. Everyone was talking about it during dismissal, but the teachers didn't say much. Then, after school, I was walking home with my friend Chris. We lived in the same neighborhood, just a few blocks away. While we were walking, a couple of 5th grade girls behind us suddenly ran past us, looking panicked. One of them said, "There's someone in the woods." We stopped and turned around. Behind the school, there's a small patch of trees. It's not deep woods or anything, just enough to separate the school from the street behind it. And standing just barely out of view, near the edge of the woods, was the clown again. Same dirty outfit, same painted face. He was half hidden by the trees, but he was clearly waving, and he wasn't just waving at random. He was doing it slowly, directly at the girls who had just passed us, like he was trying to call them over. Chris and I didn't say anything, we just ran. I don't know what happened after that, but I told my parents as soon as I got home. They called the school, and later I heard from another kid that the police were called again and patrolled the area, but they never found anyone. To this day, nobody knows who that guy was, and I don't know if he was just trying to scare some kids or if he were planning something worse. But what freaks me out the most is that he came back after the lockdown, and he waited, hidden in the trees, watching kids go home. So this happened not long ago. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia, where it's me, my son, and my stepdaughter. I say stepdaughter as I've taken my best friend's daughter in legally. Around 2016, my best friend Joanne was murdered by her husband. He ended up making national headlines and was convicted of 5 more murder cases. He's facing 3 consecutive life sentences with no parole. Now I'm a middle school teacher at my son's school. He's the year below what I teach. My stepdaughter is the grade above what I teach, so their classrooms are not far off from mine. This incident took place on March 30th, 2020, when the lockdowns were slowly taking place. Where I taught, the school was rather distant from anywhere. The next school was about 10 miles, the gas station was about 2 miles, and the nearest park was about 600 meters from where we were. So we were one of the last schools to go into lockdown. Around midday of March, it was a normal heated Monday. I was teaching math at that time for the 6th graders. All of a sudden, I get a notification on my phone that someone was here to pick up my stepdaughter. The system that works is the main emergency number gets a notification if someone is picking up your child. The thing is, my stepdaughter was 3 classes down from me. She had no appointments, no close family that lived in a good radius from us. I replied that I'm here at school and no one in a 10-mile radius is picking her up. This was sending alarm bells off left and right. They said that the person picking her up was her biological dad. The school doesn't have that type of information on file. A few minutes go by on the phone and it's dead silent. The lady tells me she's going to call the principal and see what he wants to do from there. A gut feeling didn't sit right with me. I called my stepdaughter's classroom and asked for her to be sent to my room. Just as I hung up, I was back to teaching when my stepdaughter came into the classroom. Not even 10 minutes later, the lockdown siren went off. I had kids push desks to the door and barricade the windows, and everyone sat in the corner. I had a pretty good feeling on who this lockdown was about. We were in a lockdown for about 46 minutes at this point. My main concern was how did he end up getting out? About 2 hours later, the lockdown was lifted and I was escorted out by the police. I was further questioned on how I knew this man due to the CPS records. I said I took my best friend's daughter in and explained the whole story. The police informed me that how he had gotten out was a prison bus transporting inmates to another cell, but a car came swerving in and crashed into the prison bus, leaving 10 prisoners dead on the scene, 2 prison guards knocked out, and 20 escaped. There were police already at our house waiting for the dad to show up, but he never did. When they heard the lockdown at the school, they knew it was one of the prisoners. If they had never gotten there on time, I honestly have no idea what would have happened. This happened during my freshman year of high school. I'm 21 now, and I still think about it all the time. I went to a public school in a pretty average suburban town. We did lockdown drills maybe once every couple months, so when this one started, that's exactly what I thought it was, just a drill. It was a Wednesday, 4th period. I remember because it was earth science and we had just finished a pop quiz. I was putting my stuff into my backpack when the loudspeaker came on and said, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." At first, nobody panicked. Our teacher, Mrs. Chen, sighed, got up, and locked the door like usual. She turned off the lights and told us all to get into the corner of the room, away from the door. Everyone was laughing a little and whispering like it was no big deal. But then we heard a second announcement. Same voice, but it sounded different. More rushed. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." That's when the room went silent. My teacher didn't say a word. She just motioned for everyone to stay down and keep quiet. I could tell even she was nervous now. She kept checking her phone, and we could hear faint, distant police sirens outside. A few minutes passed, then we heard something from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow ones, and not in a hurry like a cop or a teacher. Just one person walking. They stopped right in front of our classroom. We were all staring at the door. Nobody breathed. Then came a knock. Not loud, just a soft, slow knock, 3 times. Nobody moved. Then the doorknob turned. They tried to open it, but it was locked, obviously, but they kept trying. Not aggressively, just turning the handle back and forth like they were checking. And then, a male's voice on the other side said, "This is just a drill. You can open the door now." We all collectively looked at Mrs. Chen, and then she looked back at all of us, put her finger up to her lips, and shook her head no. The person on the other side of the door kept knocking and trying the doorknob, and eventually the knocks got more aggressive as the voice of the man on the other side kept saying hello. Our classroom was on the 1st floor in the science wing. I can't tell you how much I was shaking in my shoes. I know even if all the other kids didn't want to admit it, they were as well. Eventually, the knock stopped, and the man must have walked away. We heard nothing after that for a solid 5 minutes. Total silence, apart from the police sirens outside getting louder. It felt like forever. Then, someone down the hall screamed. It was a girl. Just one scream and then nothing. A couple of people in my class started crying quietly. Honestly, it was the girls. Someone whispered that they saw a shadow move past the little glass window on the classroom door on several occasions. Each time anyone spoke, even quietly, Mrs. Chen gave a stern but quiet shh. Another 5 or 10 minutes passed. Then, finally, we heard the sound of police officers shouting from down the hallway, telling everyone to stay in place. They were going room to room, and when they finally knocked on our door and unlocked it with a key, Mrs. Chen didn't even move until they showed their badges. We were all escorted out in a line, past other classes doing the same thing. There were cop cars everywhere outside, even a SWAT van. I didn't see anything too crazy, but I did see one officer leading a guy in cuffs out of the building. He looked about 30. Not a student, pale, long hair, wearing dark clothes. Later that day, we found out that some criminal had slipped into the school through one of the side doors during a delivery. That side door was right by the end of the science wing. Apparently, he was mentally unstable and had something in his backpack, but I don't know if it was a weapon or not. They didn't tell us much. They just said nobody was hurt and everything was under control. But I swear, I'll never forget that knock at the door. The way he turned the handle, the scream down the hall. It didn't feel like everything was under control at all. I had just started school, and I already had a lockdown to tell. I'm only 15 years old and just started as a sophomore at Northside High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. That morning, I came to school early, around 6:55 a.m. I was one of the first people in my first period class, which was chorus. Our classroom is at the very end of the fine arts hallway, right next to the auditorium. I was sitting at my seat with my phone out, listening to music and just waiting for the bell to ring and start the day. After a few minutes, I heard my teacher say something, so I paused my music and took out my headphones. When I looked up, I saw my classmates heading into the closet at the back of the choir room. I was confused. We had just practiced a lockdown drill the day before, so I wasn't sure if this was another drill or something else. Still, I listened to what the teacher was saying and followed everyone else into the closet. The teacher shut the door behind us and turned off the lights. We were now sitting in complete darkness, with only a small amount of light coming in from under the door. At this point, I still didn't know what was happening, but then I heard police sirens outside. That's when I started to realize this wasn't a drill, it was real. I started to feel nervous, but I kept calm. I figured if I stayed as composed as I could, maybe I wouldn't panic as much. I sat in that closet quietly, trying to listen for any sounds coming from outside, but I didn't hear anything else. We stayed in that closet with the lights off until the lockdown ended, around 8:45 a.m. That's nearly 2 hours. Once we were let out, I felt calm again because everyone around me had stayed calm too. I went back to my seat in the front of the room and put my music back on, just trying to get back to normal. Later on, I decided to ask my teacher what had happened. I said, "Were there any fights today?" The teacher looked at me seriously and said, "It's much worse." That's when I started to realize something serious had really gone down. I looked out the window and saw cars lined up in the back of the school. At first, I thought it was just regular pickup traffic, but it felt different. In the classroom, some students were trying to get information. Eventually, my friend Jacob told me that someone had been stabbed in the middle of the school, in the rotunda. I didn't know much more than that at the time, but shortly after, my mom texted me asking if I was okay. I told her I was safe and still in my choir class. Some girls in the class had started crying after the lockdown, and that made everything feel even more real. My mom called me next. She told me she had parked her car at the baseball field, along with a bunch of other worried parents trying to find their kids. Eventually, my name was called and I was allowed to leave the school. When I got to the field, I found my mom. She was clearly shaken up, and honestly, so was I. She drove me to the daycare where she worked, and once we got there, both of us went into a quiet room where we cried together. Her co-workers came in to try and comfort us, and I had to go outside to calm down even more. I put my headphones back in and listened to 3 Days Grace just to get my head right again. Later on, we found out exactly what happened. 2 students had been taken to the hospital. One of them died. A teacher had also been slashed by the attacker. In total, 3 people had been hurt that day. I started searching for more information and found the press conference about the incident already posted online. After watching it, My mom took me to Arby's to get something to eat. I hadn't eaten all day. We got our food, then we went to pick up my younger brother from his middle school. He told us he had noticed a lot of cops at the school, but didn't know what had happened. When we got home, I kept searching online for updates. That's when I saw that a 16-year-old had already been charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and a list of other serious charges. 2 more students, one 15 and one 16, were also charged with assault and disorderly conduct. What made it even more disturbing was that someone had recorded the stabbing and posted the video on Snapchat. I didn't watch the video myself, but my mom told me about it. She said in the video, the person recording was running, so the phone was pointed at the ground, but you could clearly hear the screams of kids as the stabbing happened. My mom thinks the whole thing might have been gang-related, and after I heard that, I was scared. Scared that someone might come back to retaliate. Another attack, more violence. It's hard to believe that someone actually died. I didn't even know the kid, but I've been thinking about him ever since. I hope he rests in peace.